obviously out targeting the LGBT community.
This was an act of terror. This was a hate crime.
Be investigated as a federal hate crime.
This is definitely a hate crime, and he filed a police report.
Usually, miniaturization is a clear sign of human progress. When things get smaller, it means there's been a major breakthrough that required a lot of intellectual firepower to achieve. Handheld cell phones now have far more computing power than the cabinet-sized machines that NASA used to put the first man on the moon. Televisions that used to take up half the living room are now thinner than a pencil, and so on. None of these developments happened without a lot of ingenuity from some of the smartest people on the planet. But there is one recent high-profile example of miniaturization that, it has to be said, is not evidence of progress or cleverness or anything like that. In fact, it's quite the opposite. This particular example of miniaturization is yet more evidence that that there is an epidemic, a pandemic of stupidity across certain sectors of the United States. Put another way, in this case, shrinkage most definitely does not signal the advancement of human civilization. Instead, it signals quite possibly the death knell of a political movement, and not a moment too soon. I'm talking in particular about the size of a noose that was just used in a hate crime hoax in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Now, as you probably know, hate crime hoaxes involving nooses used to be a cottage industry on the left. They jumped the shark with Jussie Smollett, but up until that point, you couldn't go a month without hearing about one of these news stories. And in every case, there was a life-sized noose that was allegedly involved. Smollett said the MAGA subway assassins threw a noose around his neck, and it fit around his neck perfectly. Bubba Wallace said he, had the full-size noose that was hanging in his garage. Turns out it was a garage door pull. Many, many more examples, which I'll get to some of them in a second. But as of this moment, as we sit here in the year 2025, it's my solemn duty to inform you that hate crime hoaxers are no longer using normal-sized nooses. The nooses that they use in these hoaxes have, in fact, shrunk, and they've shrunk dramatically to a comical degree. So take a look at this image here. You can see it up on the screen. This is a noose that back in January was reported to the police by a city employee in Allentown. And she says that she went to her desk and saw this miniature noose, this kind of like Barbie-sized noose on her laptop at work. And then she ran upstairs and told the cops about it. In a moment, I'll play some news footage about this incident to give you more context. But for now, when you just look at this news, you can see the size of it. And in case you're listening to the audio podcast, it's an image of a laptop computer apparently manufactured by Microsoft. And there's a noose on top of the laptop, and this noose is just a little bit bigger than the Microsoft logo on the laptop. It's barely the size of the stickers on the laptop. So we're talking about, this is like a noose for ants. If this noose is going to lynch anyone, it would have to be a character from Bug's Life or something. That's the extent of the damage that this thing could do. And yet, this is the noose that back in January and February caused a crisis of historic proportions in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Watch.
Well, as we know, dozens of folks voiced outrage in front of Allentown City Hall today. This is an investigation that is continuing into an item resembling a noose that was reportedly found on a city employee's desk. And our Nikki Dementri is got the latest now. She's in Lehigh County with reaction from the city and community leaders about this investigation.
When Black lives are under attack, what do? Stand up, fight back.
A call for action and fight for change.
We will not be silenced.
Community members and leaders made their voices heard in front of Allentown City Hall Monday afternoon.
Just to think that people have to go to work in fear for their lives.
Since Friday, Allentown police continue to investigate an item resembling a noose found on a city employee's desk.
This egregious act is not just an affront to one individual, but it is an attack on the entire community.
Josie Lopez is a close friend of the victim.
They're always a community leader, always pushing for equality. They might be bruised right now, but they are not broken.
The victim is not being named due to safety concerns.
Our colleague was threatened. This was an act of terror. This was a hate crime.
It's an act of terror, hate crime, an egregious act. Somebody was trying to lynch a flea or a mosquito or something. And one of the first things that you notice when you pull up these videos on YouTube is that immediately, everybody knew it was fake. 2 months ago, every single comment was some variation of "it's a hoax." It's only on television in the corporate press that you're told to take this kind of nonsense seriously. You're supposed to feel sorry for the victim, who's so traumatized by this microscopic noose that she can't even be named. It's just too dangerous to identify the person who reported this news. After all, as you heard, it's an act of terrorism. And therefore, the protesters demanded a full FBI investigation, which couldn't possibly backfire, of course. Watch.
When do we want justice? When do we want it? Now.
Speakers presented a list of demands to city officials, including that the incident should be investigated as a federal hate crime. Councilwoman Cece Gerlach tells Action News that a member of Allentown's Department of Community and Economic Development made the disturbing discovery after the employee requested mediation for complaints about workplace discrimination. That hearing was set the day before this discovery.
So you got to call in the Honey, I Shrunk the Kids division of the FBI. It's they're the ones who specialize in microscopic, miniature-sized hate crimes. Now, if anyone involved in this reporting had any interest in actually doing their jobs, they'd immediately notice that the timing here is very suspicious. So here are the facts. A city employee has complained about bigotry in the workplace, and then within 24 hours of a hearing on that topic, a noose ends up on that person's desk. And that's pretty convenient, to say the least. It means one of two things is possible. Either we're dealing with an extremely committed racist, or we're seeing the exact same pattern that we saw with Jussie Smollett and a million other examples. Now, remember that Smollett was complaining about racism before he paid his two friends to stage an attack. He didn't think he was being taken seriously, probably because he was fabricating the whole thing. So he decided to take things a step further. But again, the local media, along with Allentown's mayor and the rest of the Democrat Party, told everyone to ignore their common sense and take this woman very seriously. And that continued right up until the investigation revealed what everyone already knew, which is that the city employee had planted the noose there herself. The employee, a woman named LaTarsha Brown, not even LaTarsha, was the only person with DNA on the noose. So watch as the local CBS news station pretends to be shocked and horrified by this development, as if no one could have possibly seen it coming, other than every single person living in the state of Pennsylvania or anywhere else on the globe.
It was all a lie. That is according to police. An Allentown city worker claimed that she found a rope tied like a noose on her desk at work. It sparked an FBI investigation as people wondered if this was a hate crime. Now investigators say the worker staged the whole thing. Police say it took intricate DNA testing to solve this case in their minds.
And yes, a shocking turn in this case that brought protests and demand for change to Allentown. Police now saying they believe the woman that found that noose actually put it on her own desk. This item, resembling a noose, sparked outrage in Allentown when it was reportedly found on a city worker's desk in January. On Monday, police say they believe the person who found it put it there.
LaTarsha Brown was charged with tampering with or fabricating physical evidence, a misdemeanor of the second degree, and false reports to law enforcement.
Allentown police say they reviewed surveillance video and access records, interviewed other city employees, and asked for their DNA.
Every employee agreed, except for Ms. Brown.
Police also say Brown was initially cooperative with the investigation, but later asked it be discontinued.
So to recap, CBS Philadelphia, along with the mayor of Allentown, a bunch of Democrat activists, presented a completely unverified claim, one that was obviously fraudulent. They presented it as fact. They didn't do any research into the person making the claim. In fact, they wouldn't even tell you who the person was. At no point did they present any context, like the vast number of fake hate crime hoaxes involving nooses in this country. That's important context, that these things are always fake, but they didn't tell you that. And this is still happening in 2025 in a post-Smollett world. Daily Wire reports Michael Cassidy, a 35-year-old Navy veteran, was charged with a hate crime on Tuesday after he admitted to beheading a satanic statue that was on display in the Iowa State Capitol building last month. Cassidy, a Christian who lives in Mississippi and previously ran for a congressional seat, was arrested and charged with fourth-degree criminal mischief after beheading the statue. Court documents now say that the damage done to the statue will cost between $750 and $1,500 to repair. And prosecutors allege that Cassidy acted in violation of individual rights under Iowa's hate crime statute. The documents also note that in light of new evidence, his charge has been up to third-degree criminal mischief, a Class D felony. Lynn Hicks, a spokesperson for the Polk County Attorney's Office, told the Des Moines Register, evidence shows the defendant made statements to law enforcement and the public indicating he destroyed the property because of the victim's religion. The victim. And the victim is Satan here, it would appear. The Satanic Temple of Iowa had received permission from the state to display the statue in the state capitol. And and then it was torn down. Cassidy said, I saw this at the time when he destroyed it, he said, I saw this blasphemous statue, was outraged. My conscience is held captive to the word of God, not to bureaucratic decree, and so I acted. Now, the first thing that comes to mind here, and has come to many other people's minds, is that we have never heard of anybody getting hate crime charges for tearing down a monument in any other context that I can think of. And yet, we have heard of and seen many monuments being illegally destroyed. 100-year-old statues, memorials decapitated, defaced, toppled, stomped on, set on fire, like thrown into the ocean. Okay, I mean, this is what they've done all over the country dozens and dozens of times. No hate crime charges at all. It's only when you desecrate a monument to Satan that you get the hate crime charge. And this is also in Iowa, for God's sake. Like, this is America's heartland. And even there, they're charging somebody with committing an act of hate against Satan. Now, I've said I just said we've never heard of someone getting hate crime charges for tearing down a monument until now. And that's true, but there have been similar sorts of situations recently. We have seen people get hate crime charges for defacing and tearing down pride flags, which is a different sort of monument, you might say. So those are the two things, pride flags and satanic monuments. Those are the two things that are specially protected by the law. Why is that? Well, because that's our state religion, effectively. Every country will protect its most sacred symbols. And in our culture, these are our sacred symbols. Pride flag, satanic altar. That's effectively our state religion. Here's something fascinating. Until the 1990s, the U.S. government classified encryption as munitions, literally categorizing it alongside weapons. And you know what? They weren't entirely wrong. Encryption is indeed powerful. It's your shield against those who want to exploit your personal information online. That's why I use ExpressVPN. It's an elegant solution that encrypts your internet connection and routes it through secure servers, keeping your online activity private exactly as it should be. I love the peace of mind it gives me when I'm traveling for work and have to connect to public internet that literally anybody could be on. Knowing my sensitive information is secure when I'm on the go makes all the difference. Without encryption, your digital life is an open book. Your internet service provider can legally sell your browsing history. Data brokers track your every move across websites. Government agencies can peek into your online world. But here's the beautiful part. ExpressVPN makes privacy simple. One tap, and when the app turns green, you're protected. It works across all your devices, phones, laptops, tablets, and a single subscription covers up to 8 devices. Find out how you can get 4 months free by scanning the QR code on screen, clicking the link in the description box below, or by going to expressvpn.com/WalshYT. Well, hopefully you took the time to celebrate, as Monday marked the 5-year anniversary of the Jussie Smollett hate crime hoax. And I say that with some hesitation because I know that there's really not a single living person who ever wants to hear the name Jussie Smollett ever again. Every detail of that story has been covered. Every joke that can be made about it has been made. But if there's a silver lining in that whole episode, it's that everybody on the planet received a crash course in how easy it is to lie about quote-unquote hate crimes. You can come up with the most ridiculous story imaginable and people will buy it. The media especially will buy it and they will repeat it. That was the moment that hate crime hoaxes peaked, you would think. So if you're a rational person, you might assume that post-Smollett, the number of reported hate crimes would go down at least a little bit. After all, the gig is up. No one's ever going to be as naive as they were back in 2019 ever again. But that assumption, as logical as it might seem, would be very wrong. In just the past year, there's been a rash of cases just like Smollett's, complete with outlandish claims that don't make any sense, which the media buys without any hesitation whatsoever. And there's so many examples that, it's hard to choose, but here's one of the best ones. Last summer, there was the curious case of Scott Rowan, who told reporters in Southern California that he was set on fire on the sidewalk because he's gay, which raises a whole lot of questions that the media never asked. Here's how the gumshoes at the local ABC affiliate covered that story. Watch.
A routine walk turned into a nightmare for a Southern California man. 39-year-old Scott Rowan went to a restaurant in his San Diego neighborhood to inquire about a job. He says he heard 2 people yelling homophobic slurs at him, so he yelled back. Rowan, who is gay, says the next thing he knew, he was being doused with some sort of liquid and then set on fire.
Immediately after that, I went up kind of like coals on a barbecue. Instantly just went into flames. They were obviously out targeting the LGBT community.
Rowan suffered second-degree burns, mostly along his side and back. Not clear if he'll need surgery. He says this is definitely a hate crime, and he filed a police report.
Now, you'll notice that there's no effort whatsoever to verify this guy's story. To recap, we're told there was a gay guy who was out for a routine walk in San Diego, whatever that means, on his way to a restaurant when he heard two people yell homophobic slurs at him, because obviously anyone could tell this guy was gay from a mile away. He was just walking down the street. And of course, there are a bunch of anti-LGBTQ assassins roaming the streets of Southern California on the hunt for anyone who looks gay, so so they can set them on fire, which would seem to mean that they've been setting a lot of people on fire in Southern California. But naturally, in response, this gay guy yelled back at his assailants, and then to his horror, he noticed that he had been doused with some kind of liquid and set on fire. Literally, the only innovation over the Jussie Smollett hoax in that whole story is the bit at the end about getting set on fire. And everything else, from the stuff about the restaurant to the number of assailants to the slurs, is pretty much identical. In fact, this claim is perhaps more similar to the story of a biracial woman named Althea Bernstein in Madison, Wisconsin. And maybe you remember her. She claimed that she was doused with lighter fluid and set on fire by a gang of white racists who accosted her while she was waiting at an intersection. Authorities opened a hate crime investigation into that alleged attack and then quietly dropped it a few weeks later, saying only that they couldn't prove that the event had ever occurred at all. Which is odd, considering that it supposedly happened at an intersection in the middle of a city with dozens of cameras all around. But to give Scott Rowan some credit, we do know that he was indeed actually set on fire. There's no denying that. He's got the burns. So there's an ounce of believability, at least to one aspect of this story. He was set on fire somehow. And, if you don't look into any of the other details or inspect it in any way whatsoever, then maybe that's enough for you. And of course, the news media, the news of this alleged hate crime went viral in left-wing circles. Antifa went wild with it, etc. Unfortunately for the narrative, though, the truth eventually did come out, precisely 3 days later. Now, I want you to watch as the same crack news team that brought you the original story pulls what may be the single biggest about face in the history of journalism. Watch.
Police say a man who says he was attacked and burned in an alleged hate crime is suspected of assaulting a pregnant woman. Earlier this week, Scott Rowan, who is gay, told us he was set on fire in a targeted attack in San Diego. Investigators paint a different picture. They say they got a 911 call that night of a man attacking a pregnant woman. She was bleeding and had several injuries requiring her to go to the hospital. An hour later, officers got a report of a man saying he'd been set on fire. Officers determined the man with the burn injuries was the suspect in the attack on the pregnant woman. Then they say she retaliated using fire as a weapon against him. So far, no one has been arrested.
Okay, well, that's a little different. So instead of two homophobic bigots trolling the streets of San Diego looking to torch some random gay guy, now we learned that the gay guy was actually beating a pregnant woman to the point that she was bleeding and had to go to the hospital. And while she was being attacked, she somehow set the gay guy on fire in self-defense. Now, you note how the news station is not ashamed about any of this. They don't apologize to their viewers for airing a completely false story with no vetting whatsoever. That's because they don't care. Their job and the job of corporate media in general is to stoke as much division as possible. If they get caught in a lie, then they'll just shrug and move on to the next one. And yes, they did participate in the lie. Even if they didn't, they may not have known that this really stemmed from an attack on a pregnant woman. But these may be relatively mid-IQ people, but they're not mentally brain damaged absolute morons. So they would have known that there are plenty of aspects of the story that are dubious at best. What do you do if you're in the news media and you hear a story like this? So some guy comes to you and says that he was set on fire in San Diego by some anti-gay bigots who just happen to be like roaming the streets and looking for people. So what do you do if you can't? You don't report it at all until you can confirm the details of the story. That's what you do if you actually care about accuracy in reporting. But of course they don't. Now, fortunately for the news media, there have been plenty of other fake hate crimes for them to talk about, so they can always just move on to the next one. There was the case of the 20-year-old Ohio man who claimed in November to be the victim of an anti-Palestinian hate crime. And here's how the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, described that episode. They said the man, quote, was walking home from eating lunch when a car slowed down and rolled down the window. The driver of the car allegedly started yelling at him using anti-Palestinian statements like "kill all Palestinians" and "long live Israel" as he swerved his car to intimidate the victim. The driver then allegedly turned around and hit the man while shouting, "Die." You know, coming home from restaurants and stuff like that has proven it's a very dangerous thing if you're on the left. I mean, these people are getting assaulted all the time on their way home from restaurants. Now, for good measure, CARE posted a picture of this guy in a neck brace in the hospital just to underscore how Islamophobic this country has become. As you may have guessed, none of that was true. Police later obtained video evidence that the man's injuries resulted from a fight with his brother earlier in the day. Confronted with the fact that they were completely wrong about this supposed hate crime, CARE did not admit their mistake. They didn't offer any explanation for the decision to amplify a clearly fraudulent narrative. Instead, they said this, quote, "Our understanding is that the brother has secured their own legal counsel. We do not yet know anything more about the nature of the charges." That was their statement. Not, "We're horrified, we misled the public about a brutal hate crime that didn't happen." Just, he's got a lawyer, so, we're not talking about it anymore. Moving on.